Well, we're at your election headquarters, and it is an election night that will go down in the history books in DeSoto County. The Mississippi special election yesterday wasn't just another vote. It was the first time voters cast ballots in a newly created majority black Senate district ordered by a federal court. WRG's Alex Coleman talked with one of the winners who made history.
The Supreme Court recently made a move that basically undermined key parts of the Voting Rights Act, and that's got people worried as they see the political landscape shifting. In southern states controlled by Republicans, there's already a noticeable trend where lawmakers are targeting congressional districts that black voters represent. In fact, Mississippi's Governor Tate Reeves is pushing to eliminate the state's only majority black House district, which is pretty astonishing considering how many black residents live there.
DeSoto County, Mississippi, the votes have been counted. For Democrat Teresa Gillespie Isom, her decisive Senate victory was personal and historic.
Yes, it was history being made. First African-American senator, as well as the first female senator in DeSoto County. So it was history.
This election followed court-ordered redistricting.
It's important to think about where this is all coming from. This isn't just some minor political squabble. It's part of a bigger strategy with deep historical ties. If we look back just a few decades, in 1970, states like Louisiana, Georgia, and Mississippi had absolutely no black representatives in Congress, and that was far from a reflection of the black population there.
Voters in a newly created majority black Mississippi Senate district made their voices heard, electing Isom, who captured 63% of the vote over Republican Charlie Hoots' 37%.
It means that we have had the opportunity now to make sure that the people in DeSoto County have a voice that's a Democratic voice, not that all seats in DeSoto County are Republican.
Now let's backtrack a bit. When it comes to representation, black individuals made up around 35% of the total population. However, their lack of inclusion in the political conversation wasn't just a coincidence. It was the result of long-standing voter suppression tactics and smart, but unfair, districting that has sidelined black voices for generations. Things started to shift with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But the real game changer was the amendments introduced in 1982.
This year, it was a fierce competition for a Senate majority, and it came down to just a handful of seats. The next big thing that Republican senators will do is elect the next majority leader in a secret ballot. It's a big decision because this is turning the page on the Mitch McConnell era in the Senate. The Kentucky Republican has had the longest leadership run in Senate history. The Senate plays a really important role in confirming the president's cabinet. For some of those national security positions, the Senate usually confirms them right after the presidential inauguration on January 20th. The Senate also plays a really important role for judicial nominations, and that will become really clear if there's a vacancy on the U.S. Supreme Court.
These changes brought in an important concept called the effects test. This allowed courts and advocates to challenge voting practices, not just when there was clear racist intent behind them, but also when those practices had discriminatory outcomes, regardless of intent. This was necessary because by the late 70s and early 80s, many southern areas had figured out how to manipulate the system without leaving a clear trail.
Mississippi Senate Democrats celebrated their efforts to gain 2 more seats.
The momentum that you saw last night was about the power that we have in representing our communities.
According to data from Senator David Blunt, Teresa Isom flipped the seat in District 2 with 63% of the vote.
And now, as we move into this competitive Senate landscape, the Republicans are gearing up for an important decision. They'll be holding a secret ballot to elect the next majority leader, marking a significant shift away from Mitch McConnell's long reign. His time at the helm of the Senate has been the longest in its history, and with that changing, the role of the Senate becomes even more crucial, particularly in confirming the president's cabinet and handling judicial nominations, especially if there's a vacancy on the U.S. Supreme Court. To give you a sense of the dynamics involved, Senator David Blunt noted that Teresa Isom flipped her seat in District 2 with 63% of the vote. It's a clear indication that representation is evolving, thanks to both grassroots efforts and structural changes aimed at making the political landscape fairer for everyone. Today, there's a celebration happening because the federal courts in Mississippi decided it was time to redraw the district lines, which really changed the game.
Victory that we are celebrating today is certainly a direct result of the federal courts here in Mississippi ruling that the district lines needed to be redrawn.
Senator Daniel Sparks says he's not in favor of the districts being drawn by the courts.
That's not something that I prefer. I believe the legislature should have the job of doing that. It obviously changes the dynamic when you look at voting populations and districts that you run in.
Sparks says Republicans plan to work with all new members to keep Mississippi moving forward. At the state capitol, Cameron Smith, 12 News.
Now, Democrats now hold 18 of the 52 seats in the state Senate. Republicans hold 34, which is less than the 2/3 majority needed to ram through legislation without bipartisan support. The Mississippi Republican Party called last night's results disappointing, but not unexpected. In a statement, party chairman Mike Hurst said, quote, "The Democrats' wins yesterday were the equivalent of scoring points in the fourth quarter while losing the game in a blowout. It doesn't change the conservative direction or policies in our state legislature." End quote.
On the other side, Democrats are feeling optimistic about their newfound momentum. Despite the Republicans downplaying the significance of the wins, there's a belief that upcoming votes will be close, especially when it comes to financial bills that require higher thresholds to pass. They're hopeful that with good policies and support from across the aisle, they can achieve great things, regardless of not having a supermajority. Interestingly, the amendments that sparked such debate weren't without their critics. One prominent opponent back then was a young lawyer at the Department of Justice named John Roberts, who now holds the title of Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. He was, by many accounts, the go-to person against those amendments. The effort to challenge the amendments from 1982 during the Reagan administration has led us to a significant moment in legal history. A recent decision by the Supreme Court in Louisiana has essentially eliminated what was left of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. While Justice Samuel Alito authored this decision, it truly reflects the decades-long work of Chief Justice John Roberts. Over the years, the Roberts Court has dismantled the Voting Rights Act on 3 separate occasions, with Roberts being either the author or a participant in all those opinions. Back in the day, Roberts expressed his views in memos and debates, labeling the amendments as a radical experiment in electoral engineering. Though he fought hard against them and ultimately faced defeat in 1982 when those amendments became law, his skepticism about their impact never wavered. Fast forward more than 40 years, and now the Supreme Court he heads has finally achieved what he and other legal conservatives have long aimed for, the effective dismantling of the legal standards that made it possible to enforce the Voting Rights Act as it was meant to be. It's interesting to note that the court has been quite careful with their wording. They haven't outright declared the 1982 amendments null and void. Instead, they claim the Voting Rights Act is still intact in their rulings and public statements. However, there's a strong consensus among legal scholars and civil rights advocates that what has really happened here is akin to gutting the law entirely. By narrowing or entirely eliminating the effects test, the court has made it remarkably tough for plaintiffs to challenge discriminatory voting practices. Now, without the means to show discrimination based on outcomes, advocates find themselves in the tricky position of needing to demonstrate discriminatory intent, something the 1982 amendments aim to simplify. In a way, the court has taken us back to the legal scenario that made those amendments necessary in the first place. It's worth pointing out that there's another broader issue at play here concerning judicial processes and the integrity of our institutions. The specific issue the Supreme Court ruled on wasn't even something that the parties involved were actively disputing. Instead, the court brought it up themselves, almost as if they were looking for an opportunity to tackle a topic that no one was really contesting. The current state of the Supreme Court is raising some eyebrows, and it feels a bit like deja vu. You know, this whole situation with the court is reminding everyone of the past, especially since the conservative members have often been critical of what they call judicial activism. It's interesting to see them now taking similar actions when it's not something they agreed with before. What's more troubling is how they've trampled over their own recent rulings, including decisions from just a few years ago, all to reach a conclusion that suits their preferences. Honestly, it's quite a puzzle to think about how they can justify this new ruling while ignoring the principles established earlier. Legal experts from all sides are finding it hard to buy into the explanations being offered. Now, this context is crucial, particularly when people start discussing the need for reform in the Supreme Court. Sometimes the conversation gets tangled up in partisanship, suggesting that the only issue is the court not fitting the progressive mold. But the argument for reform is based on something much deeper. It's about a clear pattern where the current majority is willing to disregard congressional authority and establish precedents just to push through their own policy goals. Take, for example, the Voting Rights Act amendments from 1982 that were crafted with bipartisan support. Congress deserves to have its work respected by the courts, yet when justices begin rewriting laws they find inconvenient. That's a broader problem that transcends any single issue. The fallout from all this isn't something that's going to stay contained to congressional districts. The upcoming battles over redistricting are going to unfold at every level of government. Whether it's city councils, county commissions, judicial elections, or school boards, all of these areas are influenced by the legal groundwork that has now been shaken. Now, jurisdictions that once aimed to ensure that Black and Latino voters could elect their representatives are stepping into a more uncertain legal landscape. It's quite concerning because all the progress made in fostering diverse and representative local governments could be undone if things keep moving in this direction. So, in Ohio, things are looking pretty intriguing as we head into the 2026 midterm cycle. I mean, it's fascinating how the political scene can shift. For quite some time, Ohio was the classic swing state. Everyone kept a close eye on it because it usually sided with the winner in presidential elections. That all changed with Donald Trump, though. He built a strong coalition with working-class white voters from the manufacturing belt and rural areas, which turned Ohio from a battleground into a solidly red state. In fact, he won Ohio by comfortable margins in both 2016 and 2020, and those margins just kept getting bigger in the most recent election. Trump took a whopping 81 out of the 88 counties. Clearly, that's not the definition of a swing state anymore. But here comes the twist. Now, with newly drawn legislative maps and the weakened legal protections that once gave a voice to underrepresented Latino communities and others, Ohio is still a bellwether, reflecting larger trends across the country. As we look further, it's essential to appreciate the bigger picture unfolding around us. Events in Washington are significant, but they're happening in a political landscape that's in genuine upheaval. Some folks, even independent analysts, are starting to think that Ohio might be competitive again, not just for congressional races, but also for key statewide positions like governor and United States Senate. It's a fascinating time as we watch how this all plays out, especially in a state that has had such a storied political journey over the past decade and a half. In the Mahoning Valley of northeastern Ohio, there's a story that sheds light on recent shifts in political sentiment. This region, known for its blue-collar roots and strong union presence, was firmly Democratic for many years. Towns like Youngstown thrived on steel and manufacturing thanks to a lasting connection with the labor movement and the Democratic Party's focus on working people's rights. But then, during the Trump years, things took a turn. His messages about trade, jobs, and economic nationalism struck a chord with working-class voters who had seen their communities suffer from years of deindustrialization. Many of these voters opted to support Trump, hoping he would bring about an economic revival. Chris Anderson, the chair of the Mahoning County Democratic Party, has some strong opinions about what happened. He feels that many of these voters were misled. While it's natural for a Democratic official to express that sentiment, Anderson points to real evidence. He encourages anyone skeptical to take a drive around Mahoning County to see for themselves. Just a few years ago, Trump signs, MAGA flags, and red hats were everywhere. Now they seem to be much harder to find. While this isn't definitive proof of a political shift, it certainly raises eyebrows. One of the most significant places to consider in this discussion is Lordstown, Ohio. This town was home to Local 1112 of the United Auto Workers and the site of a General Motors assembly plant that symbolized Trump's promises of a manufacturing revival. For 5 decades, GM produced cars there, providing thousands of well-paying union jobs that served as the economic backbone of the area. However, in 2019, GM made the shocking decision to close the Lordstown plant, a move that hit the region hard and went against Trump's assurances that he would protect those jobs. He had advised workers to hold on to their homes, believing that better days were ahead. So, let me take you through this story that really highlights the gap between what politicians promise and the actual economic situation. After some jobs had just started returning to the area, the closure of the plant was a big hit to Trump's credibility among the workers he had claimed to support. Then we saw Foxconn, that big Taiwanese electronics company, step in with plans to build a factory on the old GM site. This was proudly presented as a key part of Trump's plan to bring manufacturing back. Now, while they did build the factory, it turns out it's not doing much. It's mostly sitting there unused, operating way below what they promised, because Foxconn is still figuring out what products they'll actually make and how many workers they'll need. And this factory, well, it doesn't have union representation, which is a real sticking point for the United Auto Workers. They're interested in securing real union jobs, not just any jobs, as a true sign of a manufacturing comeback. In the meantime, another development popped up nearby. Ultium Cells, a partnership between General Motors and South Korea's LG Energy Solution, set up shop by building a facility for electric vehicle batteries in Lordstown. This project was sold as another boost for the local economy, but the timeline hasn't been smooth either. As of early 2025, Bob Swagger, who's at the helm of the local campaign committee, noted that they had completely halted production at Ultium Cells and had laid off around 460 workers at the beginning of January, with no idea when those jobs might come back. Swagger and his fellow union members are caught in a tough spot regarding Trump's potential second term. In the 2024 presidential election, the UAW backed Kamala Harris, yet many union members still voted for Trump. This really shows how strong his cultural and economic message resonates in places like Lordstown. Interestingly, the union also supported Trump's tariff policies, thinking they would protect American manufacturing by making imported goods pricier and giving domestic manufacturers an edge. The logic seemed solid. If tariffs help bring jobs back to the U.S., that should mean more union positions. But according to Swagger, that hasn't really played out. And if you look at the overall economic data, you can see his doubts are backed up. Manufacturing jobs have only seen a slight increase lately. Since Trump stepped back into the White House, it seems like the overall trend has been a downward spiral instead of growth. When you look at the numbers, total manufacturing jobs across the nation have decreased by about 80,000 compared to when Trump first took office for his second term. Specifically, American auto manufacturing has lost roughly 25,000 jobs during this time. These figures certainly don't paint a picture of a booming manufacturing sector. Rather, they highlight an industry that's facing some serious challenges. The personal stories tied to these statistics really help to illuminate the political landscape analysts are picking up on. Take Mark Scani, for example. He served in the military overseas with deployments to places like Kosovo, Iraq, and Afghanistan. After his time in the Army, he gravitated towards the Tea Party and then to Trump, driven by a mix of economic worries, cultural frustrations, and a belief that the political establishment had left everyday Americans behind. During discussions about his political journey, he reflects on how he shifted to a very right-wing perspective. He even uses the term radicalized to describe his path, though he tempers that word as he thinks it over. While he isn't exactly proud of that phase, he doesn't shy away from acknowledging it either. Over time, Scani began reassessing his political stance, culminating in a significant change by the year 2020. Now he identifies as an independent and plans to support Democratic candidates in the upcoming midterm elections in 2026. His focus isn't so much on economic issues anymore. He's more concerned about what he sees as threats posed by Trump and the MAGA movement to democratic institutions and the rule of law. Having served in the military, he holds a deep respect for the Constitution and the principles that underpin American democracy. He genuinely believes those principles are at risk in a way they haven't been in past administrations. Meanwhile, down south near the Ohio River in Portsmouth, Ohio, another former Trump supporter is having a change of heart, with reasons that are both personal and political. Dale King, who opened his gym in Portsmouth 16 years ago after 2 tours in Iraq, has filled his office with military memorabilia that reflects a life heavily influenced by his service to the country. When a visitor comes to see him, it's clear that his experiences have shaped his perspective on the political landscape today. King finds himself reflecting on his emotions regarding the current geopolitical situation, particularly the escalating tensions with Iran. This developing conflict feels familiar to him, almost like reopening old wounds from his own experiences in the Middle East. Having fought there just 20 years ago, it's hard not to feel that rawness again. He's not someone who shies away from the realities of military matters. He strongly supports the military and is dedicated to defending the country. Yet he's clear about a crucial difference: understanding serious security threats and being careless about entering into war. His growing concern about how the current administration is handling potential military conflict has led him to drift away from supporting Trump. It's quite the shift for him, swapping out a vote for Trump in favor of Democrats come midterms. Conversations with friends and other veterans have shown him he's not alone. Many who once backed Trump enthusiastically are now taking a second look. They seem to be seeing the real Trump, not just the campaign trail version. Now, when looking at Ohio's political landscape, it's evident that the Democrats have a hefty challenge on their hands. Trump managed to win a staggering 81 out of 88 counties, showcasing a remarkable dominance for such a diverse state. For Democrats, simply ramping up turnout among their base or waiting for demographic changes isn't going to cut it. They'll need to genuinely persuade individuals, many of whom have voted for Trump multiple times, to reconsider their choice. Voters like Dale King and Mark Scanney are starting to rethink their support, which is promising, but the question remains, will there be enough of them to shift outcomes statewide? Ohio Democrats are banking on an economic argument that rings true. In more than half of the state's 88 counties, living costs are outpacing wages. Workers are struggling as the prices of essential items such as energy, housing, and groceries continue to grow faster than their take-home pay. There's an interesting conversation happening around the upcoming elections, especially as some states start to show signs of leaning more competitively. It's notable that Ohio is even being talked about as a battleground after years of strong Republican dominance. This definitely points to a bigger trend across the nation. People are feeling a growing sense of discontent with Trump's second term, and that's creating a situation where even the most favorable electoral maps aren't enough to guarantee Republican wins. Typically, after a president serves a term, opposing parties tend to do better in the midterm elections, using that opportunity to express their frustrations. With Trump, this pattern seems to be escalating even more, especially considering the various controversies and policy changes he has introduced along the way. Now, when we tie this to the Voting Rights Act, it's really telling. Many believe that the Republican push to weaken voting rights is a direct reaction to some cracks appearing in their support, especially in key states like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Georgia. If the party realizes it's losing ground in those places, their options seem to boil down to two. One is to work on persuasion and build broader support, while the other is to make it tougher for voters who might not back them to cast their ballots. The Voting Rights Act has long stood as a major hurdle to that second path. As they chisel away at those protections, it removes a significant obstacle for them. However, there's an irony that's beginning to emerge here. The protections they're stripping away were quite the double-edged sword. They ensured representation for Black and Latino communities by maintaining majority-minority districts in southern states, and those same safeguards have historically benefited them in ways they might not fully appreciate now. In blue states like Illinois, California, and New York, Democrats have typically had to stick to certain rules when creating congressional and legislative maps. They've often aimed to maintain majority-minority districts, even though it sometimes limited their chances to grab more seats purely from a partisan standpoint. But if those protections were taken away nationwide, suddenly Democrats would have a lot more options for redrawing maps, options that could actually bump Republicans out of their seats in Congress and state legislatures. Now, whether Democrats would actually choose to play hardball with counter-gerrymandering is still up for debate within the party. There's a real struggle going on between wanting to ensure fair representation, especially for minorities, and the urge to make the most of every tactic available to push back against what many Democrats view as a questionable power grab by Republicans.